Hey there guys, DMO73 here, bringing you another feature match for the week. This is again pre-ADK King, was when this was recorded. I am playing a Dark Tree Control versus my friend Josh, who is playing the Hamat kind of explosion deck that's kind of going around utilizing the demon package of the Demon Orderly and Rachel and stuff. The deck profile that I will have is a little bit slightly tweaked to be more Ancient Magic heavy, but when we sat down to play this, we thought that the Demon Hamat deck would go against a Dark Tree deck well, and I realized I hadn't shown you guys a Dark Tree Control, and Hamat mirrors get kind of weird, so we thought we'd show you this matchup and show you how it goes. So I'm going to be on the draw here. The Dark Tree Control is very heavily focused on kind of just creating a lockdown and making it so your opponent just gets to a position where they can't play, which can be particularly good against Hamat, but the thing that the Hamat deck has going for it is its very early explosive capability that also limits stones for Tree, specifically from that World Flame summoning, and because Tree has to tap to use its ability, losing those stones can be pretty debilitating. So we'll see how this goes, and hopefully we can get the lock before he blows us away. Decides to ship 4 down, doesn't really like that opening hand. Looks like he's double Dark Alice, Grim. Grim is a very good card, I think, right now. There's a lot of really good additions, especially in Dark Tree, that if not dealt with, can just be a big problem. So having that ability to play that creature while also getting an addition is pretty nice. Passes to me, call that first stone. Go ahead and play Scorn of Dark Alice. Let's take a peek at his hand. Hopefully I'm going to see that like a Rachel to get out of hand, or a Demon Orderly to keep his ramp low. I see the 2 Dark Alices, and then I'm like, well, I think I'm going to pick the Grim just so I can play additions later pretty safely. Pass to his turn. So he draws into that Blazer. Gets an Ancient Magic Stone, goes up to, that'll be 3 magic counters, so a total of 5. So technically, if he wants to, he could awaken that Time Bomb. Seems a little bit expensive right now. Especially since he would only be hitting me for 10 damage out of my deck and not actually taking care of any creatures. Doesn't really have a ton of stuff going on for him right now with that hand, unfortunately, so he just decides to pass the turn. I'll go ahead and call for stone, hit that Gusting Darkness stone. I'm also kind of playing a little bit slow. You see I have Kage's Moonbeam Butterfly in there, which I'm going to go ahead and use. Oh, actually decided to play 0 Circle of Protection instead, and I'm going to call white, and the reason why I call white here is because I want to not have his Rachels be able to kill my 2-drops. That's one of the things that Hamat has against Dark Tree that's particularly good, is that Rezard, their kind of heavy hitter, is only a 2-drop, and so because of that, Rachel can just very easily kill them all. He starts to try to use his Ancient Magic Stone to filter into red to play that Heartfelt, and we're just like, why don't you just play the Heartfelt? And then he actually pitches the Time Bomb there, which he doesn't mean to do. He catches it here in a second. He's like, wait a minute, that's not what I wanted to play. He'll catch it on his turn. He's like, wait a minute, I put the wrong card in my graveyard. So, because they do kind of have similar artwork, and if you're not really paying attention, then you would kind of miss it. But he did ramp up some counters there. Gonna play 1, finally sees that Demon Orderly coming out. Yeah, see there he catches that. He's like, oh wait, put Time Bomb in the grave instead of Heartfelt. He's ramping up counters because the Demon Orderly counts as a Darkness Magic Stone. So again, once he finally hits one of those big burn spells, it's gonna be particularly annoying, because it'll be very easy for him to cast, but hopefully I can try to rip stuff out of his hand, like I'm going to get that Time Bomb out of his hand now, and just no longer have to deal with it. Doesn't really have an addition, so my Grim is kind of useless. You do see I have that Heteroclite if I want to remove something. I've got the Kage's Moonbeam Butterfly, my own Dark Alice. So lots of different options for me here. Calls for another stone, hits another black-white source. So if he wants to play that Rezard, he's going to have to spend some resources to do that. It's going to go ahead and pay 3. Put out the Dark March Hair. So this guy counts as a Darkness Stone and a Light Stone when he comes into play. So he kind of like does some resonance triggers, which is nice. And then will also trigger his own things. So he gets both of those resonance triggers. So his guy's a little bit stronger. So he can swing in for 4 at me. Not going to take any damage, obviously. He does hit a Rezard there, which is excellent for me, as well as an Arla. It's just kind of a slow start, but having the Rezard in the RFG for tree is obviously the way that I win the game. So an Arla is a very utility card, and the ability to kill stuff very quickly by paying that life that I can use as a resource. Calling for Stone, hitting another Heaven's Rift here. In my hand, I actually have Neo Barrier, that's what I top decked, and I have the Dark Alice, so I'm like, do I want to go ahead and just play both of these this turn? He might have a Severing Winds, but at this time, wait a minute, I know how the cards in his hand, he doesn't have a Severing Winds. The risk I run here is if he does happen to hit a red source, he can play the Blazer anyway, but if he doesn't hit a red source, then he's completely locked out, because those Ancient Magic Stones can't, like, filter the colors away. At least from what I can remember. He also just can't use Hamat to pay for Ancient Magics, so he's kind of gets locked out a little bit. If I'm wrong on the Ancient Magic Stones being able to filter with those activate abilities, then feel free to let me know. But that was kind of how we were assuming at the beginning when we were playing. But the main thing was just locking Hamat away from having all of those free counters, making his burn spells essentially very expensive. So like next turn he can't possibly World Flame summoning me because he doesn't have access to Hamat's ability to spend those counters. And having the 0 Circle of Protection means that, again, Dark Alice is completely protected from Rachel, which is his number 1 way to kill 2 drops. So Dark Alice is seeming pretty safe. Does decide to play the Rachel anyway. Doesn't have a demon, but he can at least kind of like get resonance triggers. Can't really target anything with the Rachel. He could kill his own demon orderly if he wanted to get even more counters. There's really not a point in him doing that because, again, he can't spend them at this point while I protect Dark Alice. Does decide to swing in with that March Hare, and I'm like, I'm okay, I'll take that damage, it's not a big deal. Again, you're just making my Rezard bigger, and then he passes the turn. I did get very lucky with his Stone not paying off to hit the red, so I didn't have to deal with that Blazer right away. I do have the Heteroclite in my hand, which can help me deal with that Blazer nicely. But I go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and just try to rip the Blazer out of your hand anyway, make it even more expensive. And again, you can't even use that activate ability while, like, guaranteed now that I have this unsealed thing, because Blazer's ability to come back from the grave is an activate ability. So with Dark Alice and Neo Barrier on the field, he just can't ever bring that Blazer back, which is pretty helpful. Now at this point I do have 2 stones up and tree able to tap, so I can start bringing back those things like my Arla to try to deal with the Rachel, or my Rezard to start beating in for damage. So again, I'm starting to feel kind of comfortable in the lock that this is going to deal with. In response to him swinging with Rachel, I'll go ahead and attempt to bring back Arla. He says, yeah, that's fine, I can't really do anything against it. And then I'll go ahead and just block with the Arla. I am a 7/8 to his 7/7, so I get to kill it. And if he tries to swing in with the Demon Orderly, then I can just pay the 400 life that I need to kill the Demon Orderly. And I did take a little bit of a risk there, and again, he doesn't have access to the burn spell because of the way we were kind of playing it, where he couldn't cycle the ancient magic counters into a different color. He does hit red here, so it really technically wouldn't have mattered if he had a Heartfelt, but I've been tracking his hand pretty well. I've been getting into the habit of taking notes more, so I figured it was a fair enough risk that even if he did have the Heartfelt, he'd be spending 2 cards to kill 1, and I'd end up going plus there. Plays that other Rachel, passes the turn to me. Having Arla at this point does help me feel a little bit more comfortable about swinging in for damage, because it's kind of helps to protect Dark Alice. I can spend that life to kill blockers, or if he tries to swing into Dark Alice, then I can shoot it down with Arla. Kind of try to track the number of Resonators that I have removed in case I want to go grab a Res Art or something. Paying 3 for the Kaguya's Moonbeam Butterfly to go and grab a 2-drop. Debating whether or not to grab a Resard or something else, I actually go ahead and decide to grab an Arla, Abdul. Main reason for trying to grab the Abdul is just in case he happens to top deck a Grim, because at this point that's kind of the only card that's causing me a problem, or if he top decks a World Flame, of course, but again, I know both of the cards in his hand are Dark Alice's, so he literally has to top deck World Flame or Clockwork or Time Bomb in order to be able to hurt me, and he also has to hit a Redstone because he's prevented from those abilities. Swinging with the Arla, he chooses to not block with the Rachel, and then at that point I say I'm just going to go ahead and pass the turn. Top decks into that Heartfelt Fire, as you can see, so once again I'm pretty safe here. Calls for stone, happens to hit another black-white source. Again, all those counters that he's building up aren't really doing him any good. He could Judgment, I suppose, if he wanted to. He's going to go ahead and play that Dark Alice just to put a creature on board. It doesn't have an enter effect, though, because of the Abdul, which is nice. Now I know he has 2 cards in his hand, one of which is Dark Alice. So pretty on top of where his hand is at this point. Go ahead and play Blood Spray, try to draw some extra cards, and then also help kind of mill to maybe feel the Resards a little bit better. Unfortunately, hit a Blood Spray and a Gill, which is not really what I like to see. Gill helps you grab the 1-drops from the deck, which can include Final Battle, which can be pretty helpful. I'll pay another 2 and play the Wetlands. So the Wetlands is really helpful here too, in the fact that I can then tap it, recover a stone, and then use Tree on his turn. So even though I only have the 1 stone up, I can get to 2 stones. This is a very good tool that's being used by a lot of Dark Tree decks right now. So he goes to block the Arla, and I say, yeah, okay, that's fine. And he says, before damage, I'll go ahead and try to burn the Arla for the 400 damage from the Heartfelt Fire. And I go, well, in response, since Rachel hasn't done any damage to me yet, I'll pay the 800 to kill Rachel. So then Arla will take the 400, but then not take the 700 from Rachel, and then the swing gets to go through, hitting him for another 600 damage. Pass the turn there, knowing that I'm going to be able to grab or I think about passing the turn, then decide, you know what, let's go ahead and try to poke some more extra damage. I'll swing in with my Dark Alice. It's completely safe. He says, yeah, that's fine. And then I'm like, okay, well, at this point, I'll just go ahead and pass the turn, knowing that I have access to a Resard next turn, as well as the blocker Abdul and the Flying Arla, which can pop stuff. And again, I know the card in his hand is Dark Alice, and all he can do is just draw 1 card and maybe see what comes out of it. At this point, because he has so few cards in his hand, and because I have the Marsh, I'm even not particularly worried about him hitting me with a burn spell. And he top decked the Grim, which again is pointless there because I have the Abdul. So we move on into game 2. So Dark Tree was luckily able to set up kind of a soft lock that made it very difficult for Abdul to play cards, or for Hamat to play cards. and then it just closed it out. And you see the All Hamat deck is also playing Neo Barrier of Shadows. That card is insanely strong right now. I think it's still very strong even post Ancient Knights. There's a lot of activate abilities being used, and if you can manage to, you know, land it quick enough, just enough to slow down things like Mariabella or all that kind of stuff, then I think it can be potentially very potent. Calls his first stone, hits that Ancient Magic Stone. Says pass. See, he has those 2 World Flame summonings up, which is no good. Definitely much trickier for me. And I'm gonna go ahead and say, well, since you potentially have World Flames this game, I'm going to try to ramp a little bit early with my Marsh. Marsh is a great tool for tree against World Flame decks, because then we can at least kind of keep our stone base high by like double tapping them and things of that nature. Still not necessarily a good answer, but it is at least something. Gets his other Ancient Magic Stone there, goes up to 3 counters. Plays his own Neo Barrier of Shadows. If I was in his position, I probably would have played the Grim, put a creature on play, kill the Marsh, and then next turn followed it up with the World Flame. Would have put me down to 1 stone. He's got a creature on board to be able to deal with things. I think that just probably would have been the better play, but he might be trying to save that for if I play a Neo Barrier. Unfortunately, I hit another white source, which is not really good for me, so I'm going to see if I can draw into something, maybe another Marsh or something like that with a Blood Spray. Didn't see really any discard cards, and unfortunately I don't get very lucky here. But I actually did draw into a Scorn, so I'm like, let me look at your hand, and again, I get very lucky and hit the Grim. Unfortunately, then I see he has 2 World Flames and 2 Time Bombs, so I know in his hand by himself, he has 3,600 damage just right now in his hand that I have to deal with. And then he top decks Blazer, which is just another 1,000 damage a turn. And against Tree, Blazer's never really going to leave the field unless I kill it, because he can just put a card back at the end of my turn each turn. Had he killed the Grim, or had he played the Grim, then he would have made it so that the best I could do was play Blood Spray, and then I'd be really far behind, because again, he could World Flame, hit me for 8, hit me for 5 with the Grim, and put me back down to 1 stone when he's at 3, while also keeping a creature. The follow-up turn, play another World Flame, keep me back at 1 stone, kill whatever I played, like all kinds of stuff. I just think would have been the smarter answer. It ends up working out because, again, I didn't really do much with my turn, but he wouldn't have had to discard he wouldn't have had a Grim to discard, so I would have completely whiffed, or I probably wouldn't have even played the Blood Spray to try to draw cards. Call for stone, hit another green-white source, which is again very bad for me because I believe I have a second Marsh in my hands, so I could do like a pseudo ramp, but again, I don't get very lucky with it. Gonna go into my hand. I think I have a Nameless Mist in there. Go ahead and grab the Dark Alice because I don't see a Nameless Mist, and I do have the Neo Barrier, so I'm thinking, well, if I can survive to enough stones, then maybe I can get lucky and lock him out like I did last game. Nothing really much I can do with 1 stone, though, at this point, even with the Marsh. Had I seen the green stone there, it would have been significantly better, because I could have played the Marsh and then still played Release. And I'd be at technically 3 stones, even after 4 stones, even after he World Flames me this next turn, because I'd have 2 stones and 2 Marshes. If he gets lucky enough to drop a Dark Alice here, it's probably just game. Because again, then I can't use my Marshes, and he's way ahead of me on stones. But again, he's primarily just going for that burn right now, just to see what he can do. Hits the red source, so now he can play that Blazer without having to spend anything, which is nice. Again, just go ahead and decides to World Flame me, and I'm like, yeah, that's fine. You can go ahead and spend it again. Cost him all his counters, but again, you see I'm at 1 stone to his 4. Very bad position for me to be in, and he just hit me for 8. So being only at 1 stone means I have to tap for tree, especially since it's not a green source. So I can't even bring out a Rezard to try to start punishing him for it. So I have to try to get a green, and again, no green source. So this is definitely a case of the Dark Tree deck getting pretty screwed over by its stone base. Gonna use Release to try to grab that Nameless Mist back to my hands, mainly because I want to try to rip one of those Time Bombs out of his hand. just to make it so I don't have to deal with quite as much burn. Or if he happens to have a another World Flame, I do go ahead and hit the Time Bomb. So now I only have one Time Bomb to deal with. Not terribly difficult. I do have that Heteroclite in hand to deal with the Blazer, which feels good, and not having any more sacking of my stones means that I can kind of start to catch up, and I can again use my life as a resource as needed. So with a full hand of cards and release to bring stuff back, I'm feeling pretty comfortable, as well as I have that Severing Winds if I need it to kind of, if he tries to kind of combo off or make a big play. Calls for a stone. It's an Ancient Magic Stone. Gets a counter off of it. See, he has that Dark Alice, which is just not very good for me. He's trying to check out what I have in my graveyard. He's trying to count the Severing Winds right now to see if he wants to try to play the Clockwork Time Bomb then, or then the Dark Alice, or the Dark Alice first. I think the safest bet for him would be to just go ahead and play the Dark Alice first. It just completely locks me out, keeps me at 2 stones to his 5, and then he could just try to Time Bomb me next turn and use that like Heartfelt Fire, or even better yet, he could try to maybe bait the Severing Winds or something else. But like the Dark Alice is clearly the safest play because it'll unseal his card. The Time Bomb would just be kind of extra at that point. Plays the Dark Alice, I'm completely unsealed. I can't use Dark Tree, I can't use my Marsh anymore. I'm essentially locked completely, and all my ruler does is just tap for stone at this point, unless I have a removal spell, which is pretty not good. And I do have release, which is nice to be able to try to kill it. I think I had a Grim though at one point, so maybe I can see if I can get one Grim. He tries to play the Heartfelt Fire, and I'm like, I'm just gonna go ahead and cancel that with the Severing, which probably wasn't the smartest move, because again, he can just Time Bomb here. He has enough counters to do it unawakened. And if I was him, I probably would have just unawakened the Time Bomb using my 1 counter and 1 stone, because then you have Dark Alice that I have to try to deal with, but then also I have to try to deal with your token with no no real ability to deal with it. It's like, oh, I'll play Arla to try to be able to shoot stuff, and I'm like, oh wait, I can't, so I'll just go ahead and play the Grim and go search for a Heteroclite Excalibur that I can't use right now, but next turn I can get that Dark Alice off the board. I could have also grabbed the Final Battle. That would have worked too, maybe would have been better, but this way I can at least deal with as much stuff as possible. And you see there, unfortunately for me, he happens to top deck a World Flame Summoning, which he can now cast, clearing my board, making me sack a stone and getting rid of another 8 cards out of my deck. The top decks are definitely real for Josh. The one problem that all Hamat decks can have is that it doesn't really run a ton of draw power if he's not running blue. And I don't necessarily know if his variant was running a ton of blue, in the main at least, for things like Ancient Knowledge to refuel its hand. Seems like it was trying to run more mainboard stuff like the Dark Alices and barriers to kind of set up that control a little bit more that way rather than discarding a hand. It's going to go ahead and hit my board for 8. I'll say, yeah, that's fine. I'll sack a non-green stone. I still have to mill my 8 cards here. I don't actually... Oh no, he did 8 to my board and made me sack a stone, so not 8 to my deck, which is helpful, at least. Sorry for the bump there, but alas, unfortunately, it still means that I lost a creature. So I'm just going to go ahead and Heteroclite her right out of the way. This means at least that I can try to grab a creature back for my RFG with Tree, but I'm like, it's not even worth it for me to do that. I have to try to start ramping here, at least to get some kind of play in action. I'll go ahead and play Release to try to bring back something that I can use later. particularly my Neo Barrier of Shadows, to try to lock him down as well as drawing a card. So again, I'm taking a little bit of a risk in the fact that I'm playing this really defensively, but thankfully now with 2 marshes and 3 stones and a lot of cards in my hand to his little cards in his hand, I can hopefully stabilize to the point where I can just kind of swing back and hit him. Grabbing the Neo Barrier was probably my worst mistake here. I probably could have grabbed a Nameless Mist or something else that had been exiled to try to deal with his hand a little bit better. I do know some of what his hand is. I know there's the Blazer there and the Clockwork Time Bomb, so I definitely don't necessarily want to grab creatures right away, at least until I can deal with the Time Bomb. Just going to go ahead and pay 4, play the Blazer, and then swing at me for the damage with the Blazer. So 10 cards gone. If I was Josh at this point, I'd check the number of Severing Winds, and then I'd probably again still just play the Time Bomb, just to put me out of my misery here. He has to put a card back with Blazer. It's a May. He could choose not to, but he could get rid of a card very easily, and if he happens to land the Time Bomb successfully next turn, then I'm pretty much just dead in the water. Like, he can just leave me to do anything that I need to do, and I can't really do anything about it. But he doesn't necessarily want to be pressuring me too much, because if I did have the Severing Winds, then he'd be down to only 1 card, and then if I can answer the Blazer effectively, then he's lost out on a lot of damage. So there's pluses and minuses either direction. Do have the Rezard that I top decked there. See, I have that Valentina's Reach. That was a mistake that I sideboarded into. I completely forgot to bring in the Angels from the sideboard, which help your stones tap for any color. So Valentina's Reach was a big mistake. If I did have it, it would have been really nice, because I could have played Heteroclite Excalibur here, killed the Blazer, and made him discard his last 2 cards. But at the same time, this is what happens when you make mistakes, and you don't think about your sideboard very well. I don't normally sideboard in these matches, but we were kind of trying to show you guys as much as possible. So learn from my mistake, and if you're going to bring in a card that's not in color, be sure to bring in your additions that help you filter. I do have access to a release in hand, so I'm trying to figure out exactly the best way to try to deal with everything that's on the board right now. Because I also have to try to deal with his Time Bomb. I'm going to go ahead and call for Stone. Trying to do some math here. I'm going to pay 2. I'll cast Release. I have to do with the Blazer and the Time Bomb in his hand to try to do that all in his turn, and I'm trying to kind of figure out exactly how to do that. And then I remember that I've got Heteroclite in my RFG, and I've got Truth Amongst Darkness in my graveyard. So actually I'm pretty lucky here with the number of stones that I have. So I'll pay 3, cast the Truth Amongst Darkness from my graveyard to get rid of the Time Bomb from his hand. Time Bomb gets RFG'd, so no longer have to deal with that. Then I can use my Stone to untap to play Release. Knowing that he doesn't have the Severing Winds in his hand, I get to draw a card, recover a Stone, and then Heteroclite and get the Blazer off board. So thankfully I was able to deal with both of those cards, and now all he has is a Rachel. So I'm feeling pretty confident here. I can kind of stabilize as long as I can keep him off those burn spells. He only has the Rachel. I can kind of push back on him pretty hard starting next turn and try to close this out. At least is the hope. But then again, it's, if he top decks a single burn spell, I'm milling myself closer to death every turn just by drawing for turn. And so like a single flame or a awakened Time Bomb can just kill me, because I deck out. So it can be pretty tricky. I'm running a little bit of a close game here. Calls for Stone, not that he needs it, hits that 8th stone, but now, actually it's pretty smart that he hit that 8th stone, because now his barrier is unsealed. So I'm back down to 4 will, and I can't do anything about it. And it's completely locked, so I can't cast any of my activate abilities here, and then he plays Ancient Barrier, which makes it so all of my non-Ancient Magic chants cost 2 more. So then, like, I can't play Kage's Moonbeam Butterfly effectively. I can't play anything very effectively because I'm, again, only at 4 stones. Excellent top deck for him to land there in combination with the going to 8 stones. Call for Recover. Hopefully I notice here that he's at 8 stones. I think he calls me on it, or like reminds me of it. Trying to think of exactly how to handle things here. Call for Stone because I know I can't grab anything for my RFG. Play 2 to play my Rezard, who is very, very big. And then I'll pay 3 to play my Arla to try to set up a defense against the Rachel. So this was, this kind of feels okay. My Rezard is very, very large. I can at least use the Arla to block the Rachel from flying, and then Rezard can like swing in. So even though I can't use my activate abilities because of that seal, Calling for Stone maybe gets me access to Kage's Moonbeam Butterfly, and I only have so many cards. But then you'll see here, he actually top decks a Time Bomb here, and then he's just going to awaken it, so I can't do anything against his turn. Goes off at the end of this turn, 10 damage, boom, I can't do anything, and that's the end of the game. So he just happens to, after I have a chance to kind of reestablish and maybe push back with a couple of well-timed Rezard swings, he talks about Heartfelt Fire, but Rachel can just kill my Rezard by tapping for Stone. So he tries to swing in, I'll block with the Arla, he's going to go ahead and burn it out of the way, so we'll trade. So he's at 0 cards, and I'm at a full hand, hoping that maybe I can come back here. I only have a few turns to be able to do it. I know there's a Rezard at the bottom of my deck. I have that Rezard in my hand, so I'm going to just try to push it so that I can shove as much damage as possible in these couple turns to hopefully make it so he doesn't top deck a burn spell, and I can just kill him. So get my own Neo Barrier out there for no reason. Play the wrong card. See me play a Neo Barrier here. I actually have a Dark Alice that I meant to play instead. And I'm like, oh wait, I don't want to play that. I want to play the Dark Alice. Get some cards RFG'd, and then I'll also follow it up with the Rezard. So in my sense here, I'm like, okay, cool. So I've locked him out from being able to burn stuff. I've got a big creature. I RFG'd some stuff. Maybe I get lucky, and here comes the top decked World Flame that just mills me out. And this is one of the things that the Hamat deck does very well, especially against Tree, is because its spells do so much very, very quickly that do multiple things. So like Time Bomb hits the board for 10 and me for 10, all with one spell. World Flame Summoning sacks a stone and burns my board, or burns my deck and burns my board, or burns my deck and makes me sack a stone. Like, lots of different things that make it very tricky. And he happened to top deck the World Flame to get the game there, so no shame in that, and we move on to game 3. Game 3 here, I'm going on the play, hopefully not going to see a same kind of thing that happened in Game 2, where I can kind of actually keep stones around, hit the stones that I need, and not see anything too bad. I see that World Flame Summoning right off the bat, but I do have the Demon Orderly, which is pretty helpful to get rid of, because again, if he wants to, he could World Flame Summoning me this next turn by using everything he has. But it would put him back down to 1 stone with no resources, and then I would be tapping for 1 stone with no extra resources, so that's not super ideal for him. Calls for Stone, hits a red source, which is really not good for me, because now he can cast that Heartfelt Fire, and next turn we're going to potentially see the World Flame Summoning come out. It's going to go ahead and ramp up the stones now, which I think he probably could have just left it up for my turn, but again, he chooses to not. Maybe he thought I might see a spell or something that could cancel it or rip it out of his hand, in which case he could just cast it in response, but I think he's just being precautious. I'm going to go ahead and look at his hand here. I see he's got Time Bomb, he's got World Flame Summoning, Grim, and Dark Alice. The number one thing, because he doesn't have access to the Neo Barrier yet, is definitely to kill the Grim, because I know that World Flame Summoning is probably going to drop, and I want to be able to play a potential Marsh if I get one without having it die. And then he happens to top deck into Dark Alice, which is great, or the Neo Barrier, which is really unfortunate. Josh got really lucky with the top decks in this to just make it very, very hard for me to kind of keep up. Gets the Hamat Stone, ramps up. If I was in his position, I'd probably just go ahead and make me sack a stone. I start to move the stone to the side knowing he's going to play it. I'm like, oh, are you going to play it or not? And he's like, yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and burn all those counters. Played the World Flame. He actually leaves his stones up. He had enough counters to just use his Ancient Magic counters, which I'm not entirely sure was the right call. But what he could do here to follow it up is he could then play the Neo Barrier of Shadows if he wasn't sure that a Severing Winds was going to be there. But he chooses to actually just go ahead and use his 6 mana counters. I probably would have used my 2 stones and 4 mana counters, especially if I wasn't planning on making a follow-up play. But at the same time, you know, I have Neo Barrier of Shadows now, and if I manage to land a Dark Alice, then I'm pretty safe, and I can kind of... We're both trying to essentially lock each other out at this point. And at this... Now I know that he has a Placer in the grave, which is not a big... I know he has Dark Alice and Time Bomb left, so now I'm like, well, that's not a ton of pressure, so I can kind of try to set up that lock like I did in game 1, since I got rid of the Grim, and then put him in a position, you know, like the Neo Barrier, the 0 Circle of Protection. Like, I'm not terribly too worried about my stones being killed anymore, so maybe we can see something happen here. Plays the Blazer by using his Energize. It hits me for 10. See, one of those marshes goes away, which is pretty unfortunate. At the end of the turn, he's going to put my Rezard back at the bottom of my deck to keep his Blazer in play. Call for Stone. Get a Gusting Darkness Stone here. I'll Heteroclite the Excalibur, the Blazer out of the way, so now I don't have to deal with that. Go down to 35. And then I'll play Release. What I'm trying to do here is grab one of those marshes, bring it back to my hand. Or potentially the Dark Alice to try to lock him out. Do decide that the marsh is probably the best call, so I can try to ramp back up and be ahead in this game. Decide to grab the Kage's Moonbeam Butterfly instead. Primary reason for that is I can kind of wait and see what he does on his turn, and I know I have marshes left in the deck, so kind of based on what he does, I can grab what I need with Kage's Moonbeam Butterfly. It's just more utility, and it costs me 3 instead of 2 if I still want to grab a marsh, which is still fine. If I had played 2 for marsh, though, the play could have been to then play Marsh for 2 and leave Tree activated, which might have been safer and let me put more pressure on him. Both of those options, you know, it's based on kind of what I know about his hand. See that hand there helped me count the number of Resonators I have there. Just gonna go ahead and play that Neo Barrier. And then decides to go ahead and say, you know, I'm just going to pass the turn, doesn't want to risk a Severing Winds play, which I think was smart. If I did have a Severing Winds, he would have lost the Dark Alice, and the Neo Barrier would have been way behind. Call for Stone. Cast Nameless Mist, look at his hands, try to get rid of the Time Bomb. I think about getting rid of the Time Bomb, but I'm like, you know what, I just want to keep you with as few cards as possible. We'll get rid of that Ancient Knowledge since you finally saw one. I say, let's go ahead and Scorn. We'll get the Dark Alice out of there. Now all we have left to deal with is the Time Bomb. Do have the Grim to be able to deal with the Neo Barrier as well, which is helpful, but I'm just going to go ahead and just pass the turn. Calls for Stone, hits that Scorched Bales. He has 2 Time Bombs in his hand now. Can't play both of them, of course, but he can at least play one. He is going to go ahead and Awaken it just to hit me for the 10. Once again, I probably would have just used my stones for the most part, but he does need 1 extra red source to be able to Awaken it, so he has to use his Scorched, one of his mana counters for it. Unfortunately hits one of my Dark Alices, which is, you know, prevents me from getting that lock, but at least at the same time does let me have a much bigger Rezard. Call for Stone, or recover for turn. Looking at my deck, I'm like, oh, what do I got in here? Only got one card, feeling pretty safe. Got plenty of cards left in my deck. I'm going to go ahead and pay 3 to use that Kage's Moonbeam Butterfly at this point to grab that Marsh. Or thinking about it anyway. Gonna go ahead and use Blood Spray instead to try to draw into maybe a discard spell. I'm thinking if I can get into like a Truth Amongst Darkness, which unfortunately I then removed from the game, that I could then get rid of that last card in his hand. So again, I'll call for Stone, and since I didn't get what I wanted, I'll go ahead and use that Kage's Moonbeam Butterfly. Nope, I think about it, and I'm like, you know what, let's go ahead and just play the Grim and try to hit that Neo Barrier just to get it off the board completely and set him pretty far back. Shuffle my deck because I don't have a Fairy Tale for it to search for. Go ahead and cut. It's also kind of trying to see how many cards I have left in deck. Once again, I'm feeling pretty good. I've taken quite a few burn hits. I've taken a Time Bomb, I've taken a Blazer, and I've taken a Wordle Flame. But I'm still, again, I have a lot of cards in my hand. I have Kage's Moonbeam Butterfly, I have 0 Circle of Protection, I have a Final Battle. Like, I have lots of things in my hand that I can use to kind of answer his plays. The main thing is just, can I stop him from having burn spells? Which is just, can I just keep his hand as empty as possible, prevent the draw power, just to make sure that nothing sticks. We're counting my deck at this point to see kind of how many cards I have removed, as well as looking to see how many Severings have been removed. Goes ahead and awakens the Time Bomb here, so that's going to hit me at the end of the turn, as well as getting rid of my Grim. He's just going to go ahead and just pass the turn there, so 10 more cards gone. Puts me at a very low card number here. Essentially, he's done a lot of damage, plus I have a lot of cards in my hand, and in my graveyard, so starting to feel a little bit of the pressure here. You see I have 7 cards left in my deck. I'm not super concerned because I've seen a lot of his burn and his repeatable stuff from like Blazer and things like that. The problem just becomes, can I kill him in enough time to not just deck myself out? At this point I have 8 turns to try to kill him, provided he sees no other burn spells or I play no other draw power. And here again, I'm kind of punished for not having used that Kage's Moonbeam earlier, because if I play it now, I'm thinning my deck, which is even less beneficial for me. I do happen to have a Rezard, which is very, very nice, and so at this point, having the Rezard means like if he deals with it, then I can use my Dark Tree to then grab a different Rezard. Lots of different things that I can do. Rezard is a very large creature at this point. Calls for Stone. Again, with the top decks that really kind of come through for him, he happened to top deck the Black-Red Valentina. So this is going to let him RFG my Rezard, and if he wants, he's got that 3 extra will with the Neo Barrier. He can just like RFG my other cards to make my Rezard really tiny, or like refill my deck when I try to grab something with Release, or like whatever. So in response to the cast, I'm like, you know what? I don't really like you having that, or the ability to potentially put my Rezard back in my deck. So I'm going to go ahead and try to grab my other Rezard back. to at least, or potentially my Rezard back to be able to deal with that problem. Now, he's not necessarily sure. I think that was kind of a miscall on my part. You see, I'm going to think about Rezard, and I actually decided to grab Arla, because I'm like, oh, I can pay for Arla, you know, to swing in and try to, like, stop it from swinging or whatever. I think my main problem with that is the fact that by doing this, he doesn't want to put cards back in my deck to hit me with Valentina, specifically because of the fact that I have that Neo barrier. So he wants to try to burn me to death. So with the adding stuff back to my deck, with, you know, paying 1 to kind of have to add him back to his deck, with Valentina, it's not necessarily as ideal, rather than just kind of sitting and waiting. And he's played that creature, got my Rezard off the board, sitting and waiting to just burn me to death. So I made kind of a miscalculation there. Probably should have just grabbed the Rezard, because then I could have at least helped refuel my deck. You see, I've got that Final Battle in hand. I could have, like, forced a Final Battle, killed it. If he wants to pump it up to try to save it, he refills my deck, which keeps me alive for longer, makes it so his burn spells are less effective, and then he kind of just runs out of steam at that point. He wants my cards back in my RFG zone, so he's probably not going to use Valentina to put cards back in my deck. And I think that was a miscall on my part to not really think about that fact, even with the Neo barrier on the board. I'm not necessarily in too much trouble here because, again, he's only got 1 card left in deck. I can kill that Valentina right now, bring back Rezard, bring back another Rezard later. I think I have a Rezard in my hand, potentially too. So I could kill him still in 1 turn with having so many monsters removed. But at the same time, I have to be very careful because if he just happens to top deck a burn spell, he can just kill me. Just by himself, and that's exactly the position that Josh wants to be. He's at full life. I still have to work to try to kill him. He's not really close to dying, and a single top-decked burn spell just kills me. It's a very strong position for Hamat to be in against Dark Tree. I'll go ahead and Final Battle for 18, just in case he decides to put the 3 pumps into Valentina. He's like, no, that's fine. I'm just going to die. Again, I have access to Rezard here, which is very nice. You know, 2 Rezard swings will pretty much kill him. And, you know, I'll do an Arla swing here. So Arla swings for 700. Arla swings for another 700 at 14. So that means the Rezard only needs to deal 26. And with most of my deck gone, I can probably get 21 monsters removed. This deck is pretty heavy creature based for that kind of style. At least to the point where I can maybe even play a second Rezard. If I played a second creature right now, then I could, you know, throw that into whack. Apologize for me checking my phone there. Go ahead and pay the 2. Play an Abdul just in case he tries to play an Enter effect. So at this point in time, you know, with Arla swinging in, then next turn for sure, Arla plus Abdul plus Rezard can finish the game. So I'm putting him kind of on a 1-turn clock. And then I'm like, oh, I'm feeling pretty comfortable here. For everything else, I just need 1 Rezard swing. He's only got 1 card in hand. And unfortunately, once again, Josh gets very lucky here and happens to top deck the World Flame. And so I'm just like, well, I'll bring back Rezard for no reason, and then I'll mill out my deck, and then I'll pass the turn, and then there it is. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed. Deck profiles later this week. See you next time. Huge thanks to the patrons of the channel. You see their names on the screen here, some of them, and the rest are down below in the description for their support of the channel and the content. If you want to get a chance to get your name in the screen here and access to our private Discord server, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon by clicking that little P on the screen. Thanks so much. See you next time.